The Navy SEAL shoved a thick finger into Sylvester Stallone's chest and told him his fists were as fake as his movie scripts, then squared up with clenched knuckles like he was ready to break the actor's jaw right there. Stallone didn't flinch. He dropped his jacket to the floor, rolled his shoulders forward, and locked eyes with the operator like a man who had been waiting his entire life for someone stupid enough to test him. What happened in the next 4 minutes would become backroom legend, a story whispered about for decades. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades by the 8 men who stood in that room and watched every second of it unfold. Let me take you there. It's 1987. Stallone is the biggest action star on the planet. Not one of the biggest. The biggest. Rocky IV just grossed $300 million worldwide. Rambo, First Blood Part 2 made even more. The man isn't playing tough guys. In the minds of millions of people, he is the tough guy. He trains 6 days a week. His body fat hovers around 4%. He bench presses over 300 pounds and has been boxing seriously since before most Navy SEALs were born. But here's what nobody tells you. When you become that famous for playing a fighter, every actual fighter on Earth wants a crack at you. Every bouncer, every martial artist, every special forces operator with a chip on his shoulder looks at Stallone and sees a test. A measuring stick. A way to prove that Hollywood muscle doesn't mean a damn thing when the lights go off and the cameras aren't rolling. And on this particular night, one of those men decided to cash that check in person. The location was a private after-party at a rented house in the hills above Malibu. Not some massive industry blowout. This was small, tight, maybe 20-25 people at the peak, dwindling fast as the night wore on. Stallone was there because the host was a producer he was circling a deal with. He showed up late, around 11, wearing a black leather jacket and a gray t-shirt stretched across a chest that looked like it was carved from stone. He walked through the front door with one friend, a stunt coordinator named Jimmy, and the two of them posted up near the bar in the back of the open living room. Get this. Stallone didn't drink that night. He ordered a sparkling water. He was in pre-production on Rambo III, and his diet was locked down tight. He stood there, sipping his water, talking quietly with Jimmy about a fight sequence they were choreographing for the film. The room was thin by now, a few producers, a couple of women, and in the far corner, a cluster of 4 men who hadn't taken their eyes off Stallone since he walked in. One of those men was the SEAL. I'm going to call him Davis. That's not his real name. The people who were in that room have only ever referred to him by his first initial or a nickname, and out of respect for the operational community, that's how I'll keep it. What I can tell you is this. Davis was active duty at the time, attached to SEAL Team 4, on leave in Los Angeles because a buddy of his was doing consulting work for a military film. He was young, late 20s, built broad, with thick forearms and a neck that looked like a tree stump. He'd been drinking bourbon for 2 hours, and every time someone at the party mentioned Stallone's name, Davis's jaw tightened a little more. Believe me, this was not a guy looking for peace. Around midnight, the room had emptied out to about 12 people, then a few more left. Then it was down to 10. Stallone was still at the bar, still talking with Jimmy, when Davis broke away from his group and walked straight across the room. Not casually, not meandering. He walked with the kind of purpose you see in a man who's already decided what he's going to do. He stopped about 3 feet from Stallone, close enough that the actor had to turn his body to face him. "You Stallone?" Davis said. Stallone looked at him, sized him up in less than a second, the way fighters do. He gave a short nod. "You don't look that big in person," Davis said. Stallone set his water down on the bar. Slowly, deliberately, he didn't respond. Jimmy, the stunt coordinator, shifted his weight and put one hand flat on the bar top, reading the room. Davis took a half step closer. "I just want to know something. You walk around like you're some kind of warrior. You play soldiers, you play boxers. But have you ever actually fought anyone who wasn't reading from a script?" Stallone's chin dropped slightly. Not a flinch, a posture shift. The kind of thing a man does when he's moving his center of gravity lower, preparing for contact without showing it. He'd been in enough real altercations to know what was coming. Stallone grew up in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. He was thrown out of multiple schools. He'd been in street fights before he ever stepped into a gym. But he wasn't a kid anymore. He was a 41-year-old movie star worth hundreds of millions of dollars standing in a producer's house, and the last thing he needed was a headline about a bar brawl. "I appreciate what you do," Stallone said. His voice was low, calm, that famous slur barely moving his lips. "I respect the teams, but I think you've had enough to drink, brother." Davis didn't step back, he stepped forward. Now they were less than 2 feet apart, and I swear this happened. He put one finger on Stallone's chest and pushed. "Come fight a real man," he said. The room went quiet. Jimmy stepped off the bar, positioning himself to Stallone's left. One of Davis's buddies, another military guy, started moving forward from the corner. The producer who owned the house was frozen near the kitchen doorway, a glass of red wine in his hand, looking like he was watching a car accident in slow motion. In total, 8 people were now in the room, and every single one of them understood that the next 5 seconds would determine whether this night ended with a handshake or with somebody on the floor. Stallone looked down at the finger on his chest. Then he looked back up at Davis, and he did something that surprised everyone. He took off his jacket, not fast, not dramatic. He pulled it off one arm at a time, folded it once and laid it on the bar stool behind him. Then he rolled his neck, left, then right, a crack on each side, and he said quietly, almost gently, "Okay, now listen to me. You need to understand what that single word meant." Stallone didn't say "let's go" or "bring it" or anything you'd hear in a movie. He just said "okay," and it landed heavier than a threat, because a threat means a man is still deciding. Okay means he's already decided. It means the conversation is over, and whatever happens next is physical. Davis blinked. For the first time all night, something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The recognition that the man standing in front of him wasn't playing a role. Stallone's shoulders were relaxed. His hands were open at his sides. His feet were staggered, left foot slightly forward. The classic boxing stance disguised as standing still. This was a man who had thrown thousands of punches with professional trainers, who had sparred with legitimate heavyweights, who had taken real shots to the face from men who hit harder than anyone Davis had ever encountered outside of combat. But Davis was too deep now. Too much bourbon, too much pride, too many of his boys in the room watching. He couldn't back down. He put his hands up, not in a boxing stance, in a grappler's posture, elbows in, fingers open, ready to shoot for a takedown or throw a clinch. Here's the thing you need to understand. In 1987, the UFC didn't exist yet. MMA wasn't a mainstream concept. Guys in the special operations community trained combatives, which was a mix of judo, wrestling, and dirty fighting. They were taught to close the distance, get a man to the ground, and end the fight with strikes or chokes from a dominant position. Davis believed that any boxer, no matter how good, was helpless once you took his feet away. That was his whole operating theory, and he was about to test it on Silvester Stallone. Davis lunged. He shot low, reaching for Stallone's hips with both hands, trying to drive through and slam him onto the hardwood floor. It was fast, trained, the kind of explosive entry that would catch most people off guard. Stallone sprawled. His hips shot back. His hands came down on the back of Davis's neck and pushed. Hard. Davis's knees hit the floor and his face ended up level with Stallone's waist. For one ugly second, the SEAL was on all fours at the feet of the man he'd just insulted. Stallone shoved him sideways and stepped back, creating distance, resetting his stance. This is what people don't know. Stallone had trained wrestling takedown defense for Rocky III. He'd spent weeks with real wrestlers learning how to sprawl, how to stuff a shot, how to keep his feet under him. It wasn't theoretical. It was drilled into his muscle memory. And in that moment, it saved him. Davis scrambled to his feet. His face was red, not from exertion, from humiliation. He wiped his palms on his jeans and came forward again, but this time he didn't shoot. He swung. A right hand wide, looping, thrown with anger instead of technique. The kind of punch that carries knockout power but telegraphs from a zip code away. Stallone slipped it. His head moved about 4 inches to the left and the fist went over his right shoulder. Before Davis could retract, Stallone cracked him with a short left hook to the body. Right below the ribs, right on the liver. Mark my words, if you've never been hit on the liver, you cannot imagine the pain. It doesn't feel like getting punched. It feels like your entire nervous system short circuits. Your legs stop working. Your vision narrows. Professional fighters describe it as being unplugged from your own body. Davis folded, not all the way down. He bent at the waist, staggered left, and caught himself on the arm of a couch. His mouth was open. His lungs were trying to pull in air that wouldn't come. One of his buddies took a step forward, but Jimmy moved into the gap, palm up, a clear signal that said, "Stay where you are." And this is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. Stallone didn't follow up, he didn't press the advantage, he didn't throw another punch. He stood there, hands still open at his sides, watching Davis struggle to breathe, and he waited. 10 seconds passed, 15. Davis slowly straightened up, one hand still on the couch, his face twisted with pain and something else. Something worse. The realization that he had just been outclassed. Completely, totally, unmistakably outclassed. Not by a movie star, by a fighter, a real one. And you know what kills me? Stallone didn't gloat. He didn't talk. He didn't turn to the room and flex. He stood still and watched, and there was something in his expression that wasn't anger or satisfaction. It was sadness. Genuine sadness. Because Stallone understood something about this moment that Davis didn't. He understood that this young operator had walked into this room carrying a weight that had nothing to do with Hollywood or movies or fame. Davis was carrying the weight of being a man who put his life on the line in places nobody would ever know about, who did things that would never be acknowledged, and who then had to watch an actor get called a hero on a movie screen for pretending to do what Davis actually did. That's a kind of bitterness that eats a man from the inside. Stallone saw it, he recognized it, and it hurt him. Now here's what really blows my mind. Davis caught his breath, he straightened all the way up, and he came forward again, not to fight. He walked toward Stallone with his hands down, his eyes were wet, not crying, but wet, and he stopped about 2 feet away and he said something that the 8 people in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. "I'm sorry." That was it. 2 words, no excuse, no explanation, no qualifying statement about how he'd had too much to drink or how someone had put him up to it. Just, "I'm sorry." Stallone nodded, once, slow, then he did something remarkable. He reached out, put his right hand on the back of Davis's neck and pulled him in. Not a hug exactly, something shorter, rougher, a grab, the kind of physical gesture men use when words aren't enough. He held it for maybe 3 seconds. Then he let go, stepped back, and picked his jacket up off the bar stool. "You hit harder than you think you do," Stallone said to Davis, which was a lie. Davis hadn't landed a single shot, but it was the kind of lie that costs a man nothing to give and means everything to the man who receives it. It was a gift, a small piece of dignity handed back to a guy who'd left all of his on the floor. Trust me on this. That moment tells you more about Silvester Stallone than any movie he ever made. The room stayed frozen for another beat. Then Jimmy exhaled loudly, almost theatrically, and said something like, "All right, who's got another drink?" And the tension cracked apart. One of Davis's buddies walked over and grabbed his arm, steering him toward the door. The producer set down his wine glass and disappeared into the kitchen. The women who'd been watching from the hallway drifted back into the room as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and everyone knew it. Now let me back up for a second, because I need you to understand why that body shot landed the way it did, and what it tells us about the gap between perception and reality when it comes to Stallone. People have always underestimated this man. Always, from the very beginning. When he was shopping the Rocky script around Hollywood in 1975, he was broke, dead broke. He'd sold his dog because he couldn't afford to feed it. Studio after studio offered to buy the script, but only if he agreed not to star in it. They wanted Ryan O'Neal. They wanted Burt Reynolds. They wanted anyone except this mumbling, droopy-eyed unknown from Hell's Kitchen. Stallone said no, every single time. He held on to that script with both hands and refused to let go of the role, even when the money they offered could have changed his life overnight. That's not stubbornness. That's iron. That's a guy who would rather starve than compromise on something he believes in. And when he finally got the film made, he didn't just act the part. He lived it. He trained with real fighters. He took real punches during filming. In Rocky IV, Dolph Lundgren hit him so hard during a take that Stallone's pericardial sac swelled and he had to be airlifted to a hospital. His blood pressure was over 200. A doctor told him he'd been hit with the force equivalent of a car accident. He nearly died. And he went back and finished the movie. So when Davis walked up to him in that Malibu house and called him a fake, he was talking to a man who had bled more for fighting than most fighters ever will. But here's the deeper thing. I promised to tell you the whole story, and I don't break promises. After the incident, after Davis and his buddies left, Stallone sat down on the couch where Davis had caught himself. He sat there for a while. Jimmy sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a few minutes. Then Stallone said something that Jimmy would later repeat to a small number of people, and it eventually made its way to me through a chain of 3 sources, each of whom confirmed the same words. Stallone said, "That guy's seen things I only pretend to see. I got no right to be angry at him." Let that land. A man just shoved him, insulted him, tried to fight him in front of a room full of people, and Stallone's response after defending himself brilliantly was empathy. Not performed empathy. Not the kind of empathy you display so people think you're a good person. Real empathy. The kind that comes from understanding what it's like to be underestimated, dismissed, overlooked, and ground down by a world that doesn't see you for what you really are. Stallone knew that feeling better than almost anyone alive. He'd lived it for a decade before Rocky. And he never forgot it. So where does that leave us? What actually happened in that room? I'll tell you exactly what happened. A trained killer walked up to a movie star and found out the movie star could actually fight. But more than that, he found out the movie star could win and still choose kindness. He found out that real strength isn't about proving you're the toughest guy in the room. It's about proving you don't need to. Now here's what happened after that night. Davis shipped back to his team within a week. He did 2 more deployments over the next 3 years. Hard ones, classified ones. He never talked about the Stallone incident on base, not once. But one of his buddies who was in the room that night did talk about it, quietly, to a few people. And the story spread the way all great stories spread in the military. Slowly, through trusted channels, growing slightly more legendary with each telling but never losing its core truth. 15 years later, in 2002, a retired SEAL who'd served with Davis was doing security consulting on a film set in Los Angeles. The film happened to be a Stallone project. During a break in shooting, the consultant approached Stallone and said, "I know a guy who met you at a party once, says you changed his life." Stallone looked at him, didn't ask which party, didn't ask which guy. He just nodded and said, "Tell him I remember." I want you to stop and think about that. Stallone had been in hundreds of confrontations over the years, thousands of interactions with aggressive fans, hostile strangers, challengers who wanted to prove something. But he remembered Davis. He remembered that night. Because it wasn't just a fight, it was a mirror. 2 men who lived in different worlds, carrying the same wound. The wound of never being seen for what they truly are, and for 45 minutes in a Malibu living room, they saw each other clearly. No cameras, no audience, no script. Just 8 witnesses and 1 truth that both men carried out of that room. And the truth is this: Silvester Stallone is not an actor who plays tough guys. He's a tough guy who figured out how to act. There's a universe of difference between those 2 things. One is performance, the other is identity. And if you confuse them, you might end up on the wrong end of a liver shot in a Malibu living room with your dignity in pieces on the floor. Davis learned that lesson the hard way. But to his credit, and I mean this sincerely, he learned it. He didn't double down. He didn't make excuses. He said 2 words, the hardest 2 words any proud man can say, and he meant them. And Stallone met him there. In that space between pride and humility. In that narrow gap where 2 men can actually see each other, not as enemies or rivals or symbols, but as human beings carrying weight. That's the story. That's the legend. And if you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who belongs in this community. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, because I tell stories that nobody else will touch, about moments that never made the headlines but changed the people who lived them forever. I've got more coming. A lot more. Now let me give you the ending. In 2010, Stallone was promoting The Expendables on a press tour. During a junket interview, a reporter asked him, "What's the toughest fight you've ever been in off-screen?" It was a throwaway question, the kind of thing reporters asked to fill space. Stallone could have told any story, could have talked about the street fights in New York, could have talked about sparring sessions gone wrong with professional boxers, could have talked about Dolph Lundgren nearly stopping his heart. He didn't. He paused, looked down at his hands, folded them on the table, and he said, "There was a guy once, military. He wanted to prove something. I understood why." The hardest part wasn't the fight. The hardest part was knowing he was right to be angry and wrong about who to be angry at. The reporter didn't follow up, didn't understand what Stallone was talking about. The moment passed. The interview moved on to the next question about casting choices and box office projections. But if you know the story, if you know about that night in Malibu, you know exactly what Stallone was talking about. He was talking about Davis. He was talking about a man who had every reason to resent the gap between reality and mythology, between the men who actually fight and the men who get paid to pretend. And he was saying, in the most public forum he had, that he understood. That he'd always understood. Think about what that takes. Not the body shot, not the sprawl, not the physical courage to stand in front of a trained killer and say, okay. All of that is impressive, and I don't minimize it. But what takes real strength is to absorb a man's rage, redirect it with one clean punch, and then refuse to hate him for it. To see the pain underneath the aggression and respond to the pain instead of the aggression. That's not something you learn in a gym. That's not something you learn on a film set. That's something you earn through a life of being knocked down and getting back up, over and over and over. That's Rocky, not the character, the man who created him. I've told a lot of stories on this channel, stories about confrontations and showdowns and moments where somebody had to prove who they were under pressure. But this one is different. This one isn't about who won the fight. Technically, Stallone won. He defended the takedown, slipped the punch, and landed a shot that folded a Navy SEAL in half. On points, on damage, on every metric that matters in a fight, Stallone won. But the victory wasn't the body shot. The victory was after. The victory was the hand on the back of the neck, the lie about hitting hard, the refusal to humiliate a man who was already humiliated, the choice, in a moment where ego and adrenaline and justified anger could have taken over, to be generous instead. 8 people saw it happen. Most of them are still alive. None of them have ever gone public with the full story because it happened in a private space, and the people involved never sought attention for it. But the story exists. It travels through certain circles. Military circles, Hollywood circles, fight circles. And it always lands the same way, with a kind of quiet awe, not for the physicality of it, for the humanity. Stallone walked out of that house around 1 a.m. Jimmy drove. They didn't talk much on the way home. At one point, according to Jimmy, Stallone rolled down the window and let the cold air hit his face for a while. Then he rolled it back up and said, "I hope that kid's okay." That kid was a combat-tested Navy SEAL who had just tried to fight him, and Stallone called him a kid and hoped he was okay. You don't write that into a script. You can't, because no audience would believe it. They'd say it was too neat, too clean, too perfectly constructed to capture the idea that toughness and tenderness can live in the same body at the same time. But it happened. I know it happened because the people who were there say it happened, because the details match across multiple independent accounts, because the emotional logic of it is consistent with everything we know about who Stallone is when the cameras aren't rolling, and because, honestly, if you've been paying attention to this man's life for any length of time, it's exactly the kind of thing he would do. He didn't need to prove he could fight. He already knew. He didn't need to prove he was tough. His entire life was proof. What he needed in that moment was to prove something harder, something that most men never even attempt. He needed to prove that he could be powerful and kind at the same time. That strength and mercy aren't opposites. That the measure of a man isn't what he does when someone pushes him, but what he does after he pushes back. You hit harder than you think you do. 7 words, under 15, no follow-up, no explanation, no victory lap, just a man giving another man something to hold on to on the drive home. That's the legend, not the punch, not the sprawl, not the shove at the bar. The legend is what happened after the fight was already over, when nobody was performing and nobody was pretending, and 2 men stood in a room with 8 witnesses and chose to be better than the moment required. That's Stallone. That's the real one. The one you never see on screen because the screen isn't big enough to hold him. And that SEAL, wherever he is tonight, carries this story too. His version, his side. And I'd bet everything I have that when he tells it, he doesn't talk about the body shot or the sprawl or the embarrassment of ending up on all fours on a hardwood floor. I bet he talks about the hand on the back of his neck, the quiet voice, the lie that wasn't really a lie but a bridge between 2 men who had every reason to be enemies and chose not to be. That's the story nobody tells. That's the one that matters. And now you've heard it.